Good morning, everybody. Time to start our lecture today on Unit 5.2. Where I'm going to begin today is where we finished the other day was on taxation. We had already done consumer surplus and producer surplus, and we saw that. Everybody, time to start our lecture today on Unit 5.2. Sorry about that. I'm just making sure that today that when I transition from my face back to the slides, that actually happens. All right, so the other day we did consumer surplus and producer surplus, and we saw that both of them result in the output being lower than the most efficient output, which is at equilibrium, and that is the point where the surplus coming from the market is maximised. And then the last slides that I covered the other day were to do with taxation. The slides hadn't transitioned over, unfortunately, for that last 5 minutes or so. So what I'm going to do is start today's lecture pretty much where I finished off, but I'm going to repeat about the last 3 slides from the previous lecture. So I'm just moving over to the slides now. Before I go, what we're doing today is 2 other forms of government intervention. One is taxation, and the other is subsidies. When we talk about taxation, we're talking about a specific type of taxation, indirect taxation, where the government taxes a product. They charge the seller or the supplier of that product a tax, and then the supplier has to get that money back by charging the consumer a higher price. So typically these would be taxes on things like alcohol, where there is a specific goods tax, a specific tax on that product, and that imposes a cost initially to the supplier because they have to pay the tax to government, and then as you would be aware, that adds to the price of the product when you buy it. So we're going to start with indirect taxation, and then we're moving on to subsidies, which really are the reverse of taxation. Instead of governments taking money out of a firm, they in effect give money to a firm, and in theory the effect should be the reverse of taxation. So we're going to do taxation first, then subsidies. So we'll move over to our slides. I'll just make completely certain that the slides transition over. All right, you should be seeing the slides. So so we have tax with indirect taxation. So this is indirect taxation. Indirect taxation on specific goods rather than in the form of income tax or company tax. So these will generate revenue for the government, right? And they may be a form of redistribution because these taxes could be either spent on welfare or they could be spent on schools. So the government will decide what to do with the taxation when it receives it. But governments, of course, impose taxes in order to increase their revenue. As we saw the other day, the tax, the indirect tax, imposes a cost on the supplier because the supplier initially has to pay the tax, and so this lifts the firm's marginal cost up because each time it sells the good, it has to pay a tax. So the supply curve shifts up, and it shifts up by the level of the tax. So the difference between the two supply curves is the tax. And we could measure the supply curve. We can measure the tax anywhere along the supply curve that we like. So we could measure it. We could measure it here, the difference there, or we could measure it here. So it doesn't matter where we measure it. It's just the vertical distance between the two lines. Where I'm going to be measuring it today, when we get into this a bit, I'm going to be using the interval between the new equilibrium and then the old level, the first supply curve. So that's where I'm going to be measuring this vertical distance today. So I'm going to take out our other markers. Right, I'm taking out these other intervals, and we'll remember that the tax is the vertical distance between those two firms. All right, now, once we establish the fact that the tax is the vertical distance between the two firms, let's think about the equilibrium before the tax. The equilibrium price before the tax is here at PE. And after the tax, the equilibrium moves up. Equilibrium moves up to E1. And now the price is at P1. Now what I want you to see here is this, that the rise in the price, which I'm showing on the left-hand side, is not as big as the vertical distance between the two lines. So if this vertical distance between these two lines, if that equals $1, then this price rise is clearly not $1. How much is it? Let's say maybe it's, 50 cents, approximately 50 cents. You can see it's about half the interval of the line showing the tax. So what firms have to do then is firms charge a new price. I'm circling the new price. They then have to take that new price and they have to pay the entire tax to government. I'm showing the entire tax with a blue line on the price axis, and we can draw a line across, and the price that I'm indicating now is P1. That's the price that they're charging the consumer minus the tax. So this equals the amount the supplier retains. That's what they get to keep. So they might be charging P1, they're charging P1, but they're not keeping P1. They're keeping where I'm marking the green dot. And so think about this tax now. This tax was $1. right? The tax was $1. But who paid the tax? Well, the consumer paid the price rise. They paid part of the tax. Maybe they paid about, from the diagram, it looks about half the tax. But the producer also paid part of the tax. So this tax is financed both by the producer or the seller and the consumer. So if we think about who is happy and who is unhappy as a result of this imposition of the tax, well, I know two groups of people that are unhappy, and that will be the consumer, because that consumer is paying a higher price, and the producer, they are unhappy because they are retaining less. So both parties are losing here, and we might then ask the question, well, who's winning here? Is anyone winning here? Well, someone is winning, and the party that's winning is the government, because the government keeps the tax, which is the vertical distance between the two lines, and every time someone buys a product, they pay that tax. So if this tax is $1 and this new quantity is, let's say, 1,000, well, the tax revenue would then be $1,000. So the green rectangle is equal to the tax revenue. So think about this as I spoke to you the other day about imagining that we are slicing up a cake. What have we done here? What have we done when we've sliced up this cake? What we've done when we've sliced up this cake is this. We made the consumer surplus smaller. Here is now our new consumer surplus. How much have the consumers lost from their previous surplus? They've lost the little rectangle that I'm marking with an X and a little triangle that I'm also marking with an X. So the consumers have lost this part. The consumers have lost all this part of their surplus. And how much have the producers lost of their surplus? The producers have lost part of the surplus as well. What have the producers lost? The producer surplus was the red area. Producers have lost the red area, but now the producer surplus is just the red area that I'm shading. So what have the producers lost? They've lost a rectangle with an X and a triangle with an X. So who's unhappy? Consumers and producers. Who should be happy? The government should be happy because they now have this square that I'm shading in green. But the only area that we have not accounted for here is the black rectangle at the side. What comment could we make about this black rectangle? First of all, that black rectangle is the product of the quantity being supplied falling. So these goods between Q1 and Q2, they no longer exist. So that area of surplus has disappeared. The consumers are not getting consumer surplus. They're not able to buy it. So the consumers have lost that area. The producers have lost the sales from that area. And although the green area has been redistributed to government, the black area that I'm circling, has been taken from consumers, taken from producers, but not given to anybody else. So there is a difference between the green rectangle, which was taken from the other two groups, but at least it was distributed to government, whereas the black triangle was distributed to nobody, and that is why we refer to this as a dead weight loss. So we have a redistribution of benefits, consumers worse off, producers worse off, and government better off, but we still have a net loss. So I'm going to, so on the next diagram, I'll just draw a very clean copy of this now. Demand, supply, original equilibrium, PE, then a tax imposed, a new price, P1, a change in the consumer surplus, from this blue triangle now just to the red triangle. Just the red triangle. The consumers lose this, and they also lose that little X there. And then what do the producers keep? The producers have to pay the tax. So this is P1 minus the tax. So their actual price in their hand falls, and so that part is paid by the producer. The government picks up the rectangle. They pick up the revenue in black. Government picks that up. The producer surplus has obviously fallen. Producer surplus has fallen. You can see it's much lower down the bottom, and we have a dead weight loss. So we're going to now do this with numbers. So I'm going to, we're given an equation. We're given two equations. The first is that the first equation is for the demand curve. So let's think about what this demand curve is going to look like. So we've got the demand curve is going to start at 60. So the demand curve is going to start at 60 because we imagine if there's no quantity demanded, the price would just be 60. And then we imagine if there's no price, then 0.2 of Q would equal 60. So essentially the quantity will be 5 times the price. So that line is going to look like that. The intercept, the horizontal intercept will be on the quantity will be 300. And then if we think about the price, if we think about the supply curve, here's the supply curve here. Supply curve. Price is 0.2 of quantity. So if price is 0.2 of quantity, the quantity is 5 times the price. So if I just say, all right, there's a 1, the quantity will be 5 times as large. There's a 5, we can put a dot. There's our supply curve. Then we impose our supply curve on the equation, on the diagram, and we're going to be looking for our equilibrium. So we make the quantity, we make the supply equal to the demand, and we move our numbers around. We put all the quantity on the right-hand side. We're going to have 0.4 of quantity will equal 60, so the equilibrium quantity will be 150. And then with that 150, we just put that back in the original equation. So so our a fifth of 150 is 30. So 60 minus 30 equals 30. So now we have our price. So we've got our price and our quantity, and we have our diagram. Now, bear in mind on this diagram, there is a little mistake on this diagram. The axis is not actually along here. The axis is here. All right, the axis is there. That's the origin there. And it has to be that way because the supply curve, the supply starts at the origin in this example. So we've got an equilibrium. Here's our equilibrium. Our equilibrium, we've already worked it out. Our equilibrium quantity is 150, and our equilibrium price is 30. Equilibrium quantity is 150 and price is 30. If I look at the vertical distance here between 60 and 30, I've got a vertical distance of 30 there. We have a vertical distance of 30 here. We have a horizontal distance of 150. So if we're looking at the consumer surplus, it's just a half times 30 multiplied by 150, and we get 2250. And as it happens in this particular example, the producer surplus is exactly the same. So here we have half of 30 multiplied by 150, and again the producer surplus is 2250, and our total surplus is 4500. Our total surplus is 4500. So there's our surplus before any government intervention. So there's no tax yet, and the market is operating free of any government interference. Then, so we've got the same information on our next slide. We've just put our calculations on the next slide. The point to, well, there's a few points to concentrate on here, aren't there? But the main point to concentrate on here is the total surplus, and of course the size of the individual surpluses. So we've got our diagram. We've got our diagram, and now we're going to introduce a tax. We're going to introduce a tax, and what we're going to find, let's go and we'll skip ahead a couple of slides, and we'll go to our new level of equilibrium. We're going to our new equilibrium. So we're going to now introduce into our market, we're introducing a tax of $10. $10 per good is being introduced, and this tax is going to decrease our supply. What it's going to do, it's going to shift our supply curve from S to S1. It's going to shift our supply from S to S1, and this new supply curve is going to start at 10. It is not going to start at 0. Right? It's not going to start at 0. It's starting at 10 because the tax shifted the supply curve up. And the way that we show this in our equations is we come back to our equation for supply, and our supply curve, now we have to insert that 10. Originally, what was our equation for supply? It was just P equals 0.2 of the quantity supplied, but now we add 10. As for the demand curve, what happens for the demand curve? Nothing, right? Nothing happens to the demand curve. It's the same because the supply has shifted, but the demand has not. So we then proceed to calculate our new equilibrium. We move 0.2 of supply over there, and we change the sign. So now we're going to have 0.4 of Q. We move our 10 over here, change the sign. That becomes 50. So 50 equals 0.4 of the quantity at equilibrium. So now the new equilibrium is 125. If you remember what it was before the tax, the equilibrium was 150. So what this is 25 less. Our quantity has gone down by 25, and you will also remember from our original example, the original price was 30, but now it's 35, so the price has gone up 5. So that's been the effect of the tax. That's been the effect of the tax, that the we can see it on this diagram here, that the effect of the tax is to the effect of the tax has been to shift the supply curve up. Effect of the tax is to shift the supply curve up. It's to move the equilibrium from 150 to 125, to move the price from 30 to 35. And why does what number would we put here for the seller's net price? The seller is getting 35, but they're paying 10 to the government. So this price that the seller is actually getting to keep is 25. That's what the seller is keeping, 25. Consumers are paying 35, sellers are receiving 25. So if we divide this burden up, I would say the consumer has paid $5 more because they were paying 30 and now they're paying 35, and the producer is getting $5 less because they originally were receiving 30 and now after they pay the tax they're only receiving 25. So we can work out the new consumer surplus and producer surplus. How big is the vertical interval on the supplier surplus? Well, it's 0 to 25. So this vertical distance is 25. The horizontal distance is 125. So if I want to know the dimensions of that triangle, all I would say is this is a half times 25. Half times 25 multiplied by 125. We've got the answer on the next. Slide. And how are we going to work out our consumer surplus? Our consumer surplus, again, what's the difference between 35 and 60? This is also 25. So the horizontal is 125. So in fact, the consumer surplus and the producer surplus are the same. They're the same amount. What is the government surplus? What's the government surplus? Well, the government surplus is $10 a unit times 125, right? $10 a unit times 125. So if I want to know the government surplus, I simply say the output is 125 and the tax is 10, so I just add a 0, and that's the government's surplus. Oops, sorry. So originally, our total surplus was 4,000. Our total surplus was 4,500. Now we've got a new consumer surplus, a new producer surplus. Here's our answers here. So you can see that the consumer surplus has fallen the producer surplus has fallen. But of course, the government is a winner. The government has gained $12.50. So if we think about the consumers, what's the consumer thinking? The consumer is thinking like this. They are unhappy. What's the producer thinking? They're thinking like this. They are unhappy. But what's the government thinking? They're thinking like this, right? They are winners because they've now picked up the $12.50. But the lesson that we need to take from this is that the total surplus has fallen. The total surplus has fallen by 125. Total surplus has fallen by 125. Where is that fall? Where's the fall? We know that this is 16, whatever it is. Let me go up, down. This surplus is now 1562. .5. We know that this is 1562.5. We know that this one here is 1250. But what we're really concerned about is the dead weight loss. That's where we're really concerned in here. And if you think about this dead weight loss, we know that it's 125 because that's the change in the surplus. But we can also measure it as the area of the triangle. So the vertical distance is 10. So I'm simply going half times 10. That's 5, isn't it? Right, so that's 5 multiplied by 25. And that will give us our 5 times. So that will be our 125. That's where the 125 is. That's where our 125 is. $125. So so we can identify our dead weight loss. So how can we get to our dead weight loss? Right, we can get to our dead weight loss two ways. We can get to our dead weight loss two ways. One is we can just identify the area of the change in the output times the change in the output times the vertical distance between the two lines, or you could calculate the surplus before minus the surplus after, which is we have done both methods there. So we can calculate the dead weight loss in two ways: the surplus before minus the surplus after, or simply identify the little triangle. All right, so who is the winners? Well, obviously the government is the winner. Obviously the government is the winner because they're getting the revenue, right? They got the 1250. Now, what might they do with that? What might they do with that money? Well, what they would do with that money is, theoretically, they're going to provide public goods like roads or schools or something like that. That's the intention. That's the intention of the level. That's the intention of charging the tax. All right. So what we just saw was that government imposed a tax, consumer surplus fell, producer surplus fell, government surplus rose, but the rise that the amount that the government took away from the consumer surplus and the producer surplus was actually less than the government received. So they took something like 1,375, I think, away from the consumers and producers, but they only wound up with 1,250, and there was a 125 difference, and that's why we use the term dead weight loss there, because the government took more from the consumers and producers than they actually gained themselves in revenue. So it was an inefficient way of gaining the revenue, because it reduced the output in the economy in the process of gaining government revenue. If you think about what happened in the previous example, the government tax was $10. The consumers paid $5 more in price, and the producers got $5 less after they paid the tax. So the burden of this $10 tax was actually split. They paid half, but that is not always the case. So what we're going to do now is look at the way that this burden of taxation might be distributed. And the crucial concept in here is elasticity. So I'm going to move forward. I'm going to vary the prepared text slides a little bit. I'm going to draw freehand a little bit first, and then I will go back to the published slides. So you should be seeing the slides now. So as I said before, just then, was this, that the burden, the change in the consumer surplus and the change in the producer surplus was the same, and the combined price rise had been split between the consumers and the producers. The burden had been split. However, that is not always the case, because goods vary in their elasticity. Goods vary in their elasticity. So I'm going to just move a few slides down. I'm going to go to a blank slide before I come back to the next slide in the presentation. So I want you to imagine this. I have two products. One has quite an elastic demand curve, and one has quite an inelastic demand curve. And at the moment, they both have the same price. Right? They both have the same price. And they both have a similar looking supply curve. They both have a similar looking supply curve, a similar slope on their supply curve, a similar elasticity on their supply curve. And the government imposes the same tax on both products. So there's the supply curve moving up, and on the right-hand side, I'm going to try and get the supply curve moving up by roughly the same amount. So now both goods, what do they have in common? They have a lot in common at the moment, right? The price is the same. The shape of the supply curve is the same. The tax is the same. But the effect of the tax is not the same. So look at what goes on now. On the product on the right-hand side, there's a new equilibrium price, which I'm going to call P1. And if we take away from that price the taxation, the firm has to pay the tax to government. I can put a new price in here called P1 minus T. That's what the firm gets to keep. On the left-hand side, same sort of thing happens. The same sort of thing happens. We go to a new equilibrium. We get P1. Price goes up to P1. The firm then pays the tax, and they get to keep P1 minus T. But you can see that there's a clear difference here, right? There's a clear difference between the product on the left. The product on the left is a price inelastic product. And what's going on with this product on the left? First of all, the price rise is bigger. See the price rise? Price rise is bigger. Secondly, what's happening with the quantity in the product on the left? There's the original quantity in the product on the left. Here's the new quantity with the product on the left. So the price rise is bigger, but the quantity fall is smaller. The quantity fall is smaller. Just want to get rid of this. Okay, next. So the price rise is bigger, quantity fall is smaller. What else could we say? The burden on the consumer on the right-hand side is smaller. The burden on the consumer on the left-hand side, the price inelastic goods. So this one's inelastic. Right? The consumer is paying a much bigger price rise, but the producer is paying a much smaller amount of the tax. On the inelastic one, the producer pays a smaller amount. The consumer pays a bigger amount. Where demand is elastic, let's go over and look at the elastic one. There's a big fall in the quantity. So the producer is being hit hard there. Producer is being hit harder there. And there's a bigger fall in the quantity and a smaller rise in the price. So if you are a supplier, you would be hoping that the government is, I'll put it a different way. If you are the supplier and the government imposes a tax, you will be less unhappy. You won't like this very much. Right? You won't like it very much. But if you are a supplier of a price elastic good, you are going to hate it because your burden of tax will be much higher. Your burden of tax will be much higher. And not only that, you're going to lose a lot more sales. So a tax on a price elastic product will do much more harm to the economy. And that's why this slide is there, right? Governments try and, if governments are doing this, they try and tax goods with lower elasticities. They try and tax goods with lower elasticity. Why? Because the price rise is higher, but the quantity fall is lower, and so there's less harm done to the economy. If we go back and look at the diagram, this diagram, you can I'll go back and look at my diagram. I want to do one more thing here. I want you to look at the dead weight loss in the price inelastic good. I'm shading in the dead weight loss of the price inelastic good, and then I'm shading in the dead weight loss of the price elastic good. So if we're thinking about, we could summarize this. I'll move the slide down and I'll summarize this just by writing a couple of notes for you. So when we're thinking about price elastic good, price rise, smaller. Quantity fall, larger. And if we think about the quantity fall being larger, if there's a large fall in the quantity, then what's happening to employment? What's happening to jobs? Right? What's happening to jobs? If a firm is supplying a lot less goods, then jobs are going to fall. So charging these indirect taxes on very elastic goods, they're going to do big damage to industry, because there's going to be a big fall in the quantity being traded, and therefore those firms, the industry is going to get smaller and jobs will be lost. And that's why we say the dead weight loss will be larger. The dead weight loss will be larger. And so for those reasons, government tends to tax indirect tax less elastic products. So if you think about our specific taxes on specific products in Australia, I know that we have the GST, which is on many products, but we also have specific taxes on some products like cigarettes. Now, cigarettes will, because smokers tend to be addicted to tobacco, when prices go up, those smokers will still stick to their demand for the product. So the demand is not much affected. So tobacco tends to be price inelastic. We also have specific taxes on gasoline, fuel. And again, people need to drive their cars, and if the tax goes up, people will complain about the tax, but then they'll go and buy the gas anyway. So that's a second effect, a second example. The third one in Australia is alcohol. So we have three big taxes on specific goods, and all of them tend to be price inelastic goods. Okay, now I used this diagram. The reason I drew a hand-drawn diagram was because I only wanted to focus on the demand curve. So if you look at my diagram that I drew before, I varied the demand curve, but I had the same slope on the supply curve. The reason I did that is because I wanted to isolate the effect of an inelastic demand. And governments will, when they're choosing what goods to tax, they will be looking for goods like these goods. Right? They will be looking for goods that tend to have inelastic demands. However, the elasticity of supply will still influence the size of the dead weight loss. So both the elasticity of demand and elasticity of supply influence the dead weight loss, because if we think about elasticity generally, both for demand and supply, elasticity. Okay, what are we talking about elasticity? We're talking about the percentage change in the quantity demanded over the percentage change in the price. So what what is elasticity really about? Elasticity is really about this: the change in the quantity. If something is elastic, the quantity is changing more. Look at the diagram on the left. They are more elastic curves, and when this tax gets imposed, there's two things changing the quantity here. One is the elasticity of demand, the other is the elasticity of supply. Both of them are contributing to the big change in output, and under these circumstances, the quantity really falls off significantly, and because that quantity falls off so significantly, there's a much bigger dead weight loss. This change in quantity here, right? It's not just a number on a line. That represents real production and real jobs. So if the government was to impose a tax on an industry that already had a very elastic supply curve and an elastic demand curve, it's going to do a lot of damage to that industry. Whereas if the government imposes the same tax, they don't look the same, but actually these taxes are the same. The vertical distance between these two lines, that's the same. But in the case on the right, the change in output is much lower. And as a result of that, the dead weight loss is less. So the lesson to be drawn from all this is that governments, when they're looking to impose indirect taxes, are going to be looking at these sorts of goods. Right? They're going to be looking for these sorts of goods on the right-hand side. They're going to be looking for those. All right, so there's just one more slide on this, I think. So who are the losers of a taxation policy? Well, consumers and producers are both going to lose. Consumers will lose more if the demand is inelastic, or even worse, if it's perfectly elastic. Producers will lose if supply, if demand is more elastic. All right, I'm going to move on now, and we're now going to do subsidies. At the end of the previous slide, there was a little bit of a note about winners might be more willing to pay in a direct way. I think that's a textbook slide, but I think what Alberto and Isabella, writers of the textbook, were actually saying there is there might be more efficient ways of taxing people than taxing products, which distort the whole market. I'm moving on to subsidies. Now, a subsidy is the reverse of a tax. The subsidy occurs where instead of, if you think about the tax, it made the product's output smaller. Sometimes governments will do that because they actually want to discourage the use of a product. And so even when we use the term dead weight loss, it might not always be a dead weight loss in the case of a tax, because the dead weight loss usually, we refer to it usually because it's caused a decrease in output and made the industry smaller. But for some industries, it might be a good idea to make them smaller. Cigarette smoking is a classic example. When we get to Unit 9, we're going to go back and look at these taxes, and we'll see that yes, we can show a dead weight loss from a tax on a diagram, which is what we just did. But but sometimes a deadweight loss might exist if we don't tax a harmful good. So there's a little bit more to kind of see in this area of indirect taxation. But for the moment, you should be able now to look at an equation, work out an equilibrium, know how to change the supply curve when the tax is imposed, find the new equilibrium, work out the new consumer surplus, producer surplus, government revenue, and the deadweight loss. With a subsidy, instead of the government charging something to the supplier, with a subsidy, the government is giving something to the supplier. So they might be trying to, opposite to a tax, instead of trying to discourage something by taxing it, they might be trying to encourage the production and consumption of a good by subsidizing it. So if a tax moves the supply curve up because it's making life more expensive for the consumer, a subsidy moves the supply curve down because it's making life cheaper for the producer. So if the government is giving you $2 a unit for every unit you produce, then that's lowering your production costs because you can take that money and pay some of your costs of production with that subsidy. Sometimes the government does not give a direct cash subsidy, but they may subsidise the firm in other ways. For example, if the government owns the train network, they might give the firm some sort of concession on their rail transport costs. Or if the government were to own the electricity industry, they might give firms lower electricity charges. That would also be a form of subsidy. So let's get into subsidies now, and I've got a little worked example to do with you at the end. So let's get moving on this. Just transitioning back, you should have your slides in front of you now. So a subsidy, it's the opposite of a tax. Well, it's the opposite of a tax. It's a cost to government. Right? It's a cost to government. How much does it cost government? It costs government this. It costs the government the per good subsidy. Right? The per good subsidy multiplied by the number of goods. Right, so if they're giving you $2, right, if the government's giving you $2 a good, and, so for example, if that was $2 a good every time you produce the good, and this is 1,000 goods over here, well, what's the cost? The cost is now $2,000. That's the cost of the subsidy. Okay, now on our we can see on our diagram in front of us that in the diagram on the left, we can show that the equilibrium was at a certain point. The price is shown. We can show the consumer surplus. We can show the producer surplus. All right, that's pretty simple. And then if we take this price across, right, that's the price before the subsidy. And then what happens with the subsidy is this. The subsidy moves the price down, right? The subsidy, moves the supply curve down. There'll be a new equilibrium price. Now the price falls to a new lower price. So you can, and a new lower price and a higher quantity. So you can see that the quantity gets bigger and the price gets lower. And then if we look at the supply curve, look at the supply curve, look where the supply curve starts before the subsidy, and look where the supply curve starts after the subsidy. Why does it start in a lower place? Because the subsidy has shifted the supply curve down. So the supply curve starts in a lower place. We can then shade in the producer surplus. And if you look at the producer surplus compared to before the subsidy, the producer surplus is clearly larger, right? The producer surplus is larger. Why is the producer surplus larger? Because the marginal cost has been artificially brought down, and the quantity is larger. And you can also see on the diagram that the producer surplus is much larger. Okay, so if we think about what we've just drawn, we can see that on the right-hand side, the producer surplus has gone up. The consumer surplus has gone up. So everyone's a winner here, right? Everyone is smiling here because both consumers and producers are better off, except that there's a third party that we need to consider in here. And the third party is the government. Because although the consumer surplus and the producer surplus grew, the government has had to pay for the subsidy. And how much is the government paying? The government is paying $2 a good. There's the vertical distance. They are paying $2 a good multiplied by the number of goods. So we could really shade that area in and show the size of what it costs to provide the subsidy. I've done a little model here with an equation for you, right? For a little. So I'm going to just insert a slide because I'm going to draw a diagram for this as well. All right, now, so we just start off with our equations. First of all, we've got an equation for demand. We've got an equation for supply. We just put that there. We just put this here, right? And then we essentially right. We then move. We're moving Q over there. We're moving 4 over there. We then get 2Q equals 6. So the quantity will be 3. And then I'm going to put that 3 up here. And I'm going to put the 3 up here. And now the price is going to be 7. So we've got a diagram where the price is 3 and the quantity is 7. So let's go down to the next slide. Let's draw it. All right, here we are. The quantity's 3. The price is 7. Here is our equilibrium. There is our equilibrium there. Oh, by the way, if we go back to our equation, what does the demand curve look like? The demand curve is going to start at price 10, and the quantity on the quantity axis, if we imagine that the price doesn't exist, then the quantity becomes 10 as well. So when I come to drawing this line, my demand curve looks like this. Right, it goes from 10 to 10. All right, goes from 10 to 10, and our output, I'll have to fix this, forgive me. I want to get some appearance of scale. I'm going to try and fix this a bit. Excuse me here. All right, this will be our 3. That's 10. That's 10. And remember our supply curve. What did our supply curve do? Our supply curve, if we think about our supply curve originally, where did our supply curve start? Our supply curve started at 4. Our supply curve started at 4. So on our diagram, we get our supply curve at 4. We draw it through there. It's starting at 4. We've got an equilibrium of 3 quantity, and we've got an equilibrium price of 10. So if I work out my consumer surplus here, let's just quickly work out our consumer surplus. Our consumer surplus will be the distance here, the vertical distance. The vertical distance is 3, and the horizontal distance is 3. So we've got half of 3 times 3. So our consumer surplus will be 4.5. 4.5. And the same at the bottom. The vertical distance is 3. So half of 3 is 1.5 times 3. 1.5, this is 4.5. So our total surplus before we have any subsidy at all is 9. Then let's go back to our model. We're now going to introduce a subsidy of $2 a good. So what that means is the price in supply is now going to start at 2 instead of starting at 4. So you can see the 4 becomes the 2. So our price in supply starts at 2 rather than 4. And then we work out our equilibrium. But now 2Q, it doesn't equal 6 anymore because now we're subtracting just 10 minus 2. So the quantity will be 4. So you can see that the quantity, what's gone on with the quantity when the subsidy happens, it just got bigger. And the price, once we insert the 4 back up into our demand curve, that's going to be 6. So the price comes down. So that's really the effect of the subsidy, right? The quantity gets bigger, the price gets smaller. And so on our diagram, we can then draw our new diagram. The diagrams again. Here's our diagram. Starts at 10, goes to 10, but now our supply curve does not start at 4. Our supply curve does not start at 4. It starts at 2. So here's our supply curve going out like so. Now we have, I think that's a bit steeper. I'm going to fix that. Our supply curve goes out like so. And now our price is not 7, our price is now 6, and our quantity is 4. So then we work out our, and this is starting at 2. So the vertical distance is 4, half of 4 is 2, times 4. Now, half of 2 times 4, that number is 8. The producer surplus is now 8, and although this is not to scale, this is 10, this is also 4, the vertical distance is 10. So the vertical distance here is 4, half of 4 times 4, again, is 8. The consumer surplus and producer surplus is now 16. And I've produced a proof down the bottom. All right, we've produced a proof down the bottom. The consumer surplus is now 16. Sorry, the combined surplus is now 16. Instead of 9. So in the first instance, I might be tempted, or we might be tempted to say that the subsidy's been great. The subsidy's been great because it made the consumer surplus bigger. It turned the consumer surplus from 4.5 to 8. It made the producer surplus bigger. It turned that from 4.5 to 8. So the net gain in consumer surplus and producer surplus is 7. Fantastic. Except that, what does it cost to provide, excuse that spelling, what does it actually cost to provide the surplus? Well, it costs $2 and the new output is 4. There it is over there. So in order to gain 7 units of surplus, someone else had to pay 8. So the net result of this is -1. So it's not actually efficient at all, because the gain provided to the consumer and producer was subsidised by an even bigger cost to government. And of course, government does not provide its own funds. Some other taxation, someone else is paying tax. So someone else is paying $8 worth of tax to provide a $7 benefit to the consumers and producers of this product. So the cost is greater than the benefit, right? There's the cost there. There's the benefit there. And then if we go back to lecture 1, if the cost is greater than the benefit, maybe you should be thinking about not engaging in this practice. We can show that dead weight loss of 1 on the diagram now. Right, we can show this on the diagram. Just let me play with this for a minute. Okay. Now, how can we show this dead weight loss? So this is really our last slide for the day. The dead weight loss is shown this way. We know that at Q, this is the equilibrium here. That is the point of greatest efficiency. The red line that I'm marking is the true marginal cost of making this product. The blue line is not the true marginal cost because it's distorted by the subsidy, which is bringing it down. I'm putting a $2 to show that line moving down. we know that our new equilibrium is 6. We know that our new equilibrium quantity is 4. And we know that our old equilibrium quantity is 3. So the difference between 3 and 4 is 1. And for those goods, those could be 1,000, 1 million goods, whatever it is. For those goods, the marginal cost is greater than the marginal benefit shown by the diagram. And as a result of that, we'd say these goods should not be made because the consumers would only be prepared to pay this price, and that price is lower than the marginal cost. So if it was up to consumers to buy these goods, they wouldn't be buying them. They're only going to buy them because the government makes them artificially cheap. And in a way, you could say that's wasting these goods. Because if the government's making something artificially cheap, people will waste it. They won't value it. And we know they don't value it because the marginal benefit curve, the demand curve, is telling us that. And so then we say, well, what's the vertical distance between the two lines? The vertical distance between the two lines is 2. And what's the horizontal distance? It's 1. So we just say, what is half of 2? Obviously that's 1, times 1. And that is our dead weight loss. Right, so the area that I'm now shading, that is 1, and that accounts for the distance, the difference. That accounts for the difference that we saw on the previous slide with the calculations. Yes, that accounts for the difference we saw on the previous slide, right, where there was a net cost of 1. So we've now shown it on our diagram. There's our dead weight loss. We calculated it, and then we also saw it on the diagram. That ends topic 5. So next week there are no classes. In week 7 we're going to move on to international trade, I think. International trade, we've got another 5 units to do, but some of those are quite short. I anticipate those 5 units will take us 4 weeks, and then we'll do 1 revision in the final week. So thanks for your attention today, and I'll see you all in week